don't you know it's bullshit from the first word? If Congress is trying to pass something called the Journalism Competition and Preservation Act, you've probably heard the story before about how Sinclair has bought up a lot of local media stations and in many regards, not fully, but in many regards, forces them to do a certain kind of news, sometimes to do the exact same story, which I'll get to more on that in a moment. But there's a new aspect of it that is not getting nearly enough coverage of this obliteration, absolute destruction of local news. How lawmakers are helping Sinclair Broadcast Group destroy local news. National and state level efforts to save local news would reward chains like Sinclair that continue to neglect the information needs of communities they're supposed to serve. And before I get into this, let me just say that this also is really important to the propaganda efforts of our system, of our entire governmental system that has propagandized us to such an extreme level. Local news, as with local elections, has been traditionally a little more free. Like there's areas in the country where there just aren't as strong gatekeepers. There's far less money involved. There's far less corporate interest, and the corporations that are involved are not as powerful. You know, it's like Smithy's painting. If you need to get something painted, go down to Smithy's. Like, he's the guy that owns your local news as opposed to ExxonMobil and Pfizer. Now, to some degree, that's not as true. I'm sure Pfizer buys plenty of local news ads, but I'm just saying that traditionally, historically, local news has been a little freer. This means that you could get sometimes the truth from some of these local news stations. Unfortunately, they didn't have the also, historically, they didn't have the money for real deep investigations. So before the internet, it was hard times for them to do real investigations. Very few deeper investigations would come out of it. But nowadays, right, since the internet around, anyone can do an investigation in generally shorter amount of time. So that makes the local news kind of dangerous to the talking points of the ruling elite. So this continued crackdown on local journalism is useful, even though a lot of local news is lame garbage. You know, you'll see the commercial and be like, go down to Smithy's if you need a paint job. And then they're like, so today on News at 6, why paint other than Smithy's is toxic. And you're like, what? There's not any conflict of interest here, is there? Paint's coming from other companies other than Smithy's super safe paint will give your kid ringworm of the eye. Anyway, both the California Journalism Preservation Act, so you can just ignore these names. They're stupid and they're designed to manipulate you, so we'll just call it the CJPA. And the federal level, so one of these is California, one of them's federal. The federal level Journalism Competition and Preservation Act. I mean, don't you know it's bullshit from the first word? If Congress is trying to pass something called the Journalism Competition and Preservation Act, doesn't that raise every alarm? Bing, 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 do, 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 bing, zig, zig, do, do, do. Like radiation, fire, and flood alarms all going off at once, that it is horse manure? If our Congress, think about who's in our Congress. If our Congress gets together and is getting ready to pass the Journalism Competition and Preservation Act, how many members of Congress do you think really, really want to preserve journalism? Zero. So you know it's horse manure from the first word, man. From the first word. Anyway, those are the true bills, and they would allow news publishers, including broadcast companies, to extract payments from large social media enterprises like Alphabet and Meta, Alphabet being Google's parent, Meta, Facebook parent, in exchange for linking to their content. This would apply to any content regardless of its accuracy or news value. Okay, think about this just for a minute. In general, extracting money from Google and Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, I have no problem with that. Any way you can steal money from those bastards, you do it and you live it up. Absolutely. However, the reason this is nefarious is because it's extracting money from them, fine, giving it to the largest media companies in the country. So even though it's local news and you think, oh, local news, the little guy. It's like, no, it's the little guy if the hand up the little guy's ass is all one guy with 1,000 arms and he's got the hand up each ass. He's just puppeteering all the local news and you're like, it's the little guy. Look, let's take care of little guy. And you're not paying attention. That's a finger puppet, man. It's Sinclair as all of them. So I have no problem with stealing money from Alphabet and Meta. I have a problem with where that money's going. One of the bigger beneficiaries of California's CJPA and the U.S. Senate's JCPA is a conglomerate that seems determined to get rid of local news and replace it with right-wing spin produced at a quote-unquote national desk. Far from the communities this broadcast company is legally obligated to serve. The conglomerate, Sinclair Broadcast Group, recently announced plans to eliminate entire local newsrooms at local television stations in 5 broadcast areas. Sinclair is also drastically cutting newsroom staff at an additional 5 local stations, pushing all of these stations to fill the resulting news hole. That sounds dirty. With national desk boilerplate. That sounds painful. That means 0 local coverage and lots of the cookie cutter conservatism that Sinclair has pumped out via the public airwaves for decades. Okay, now if you need a refresher, and I am sure that probably 70% of you have already seen this clip, but it's worth watching again and again. If you need a refresher on what it is Sinclair does with their local news and how it is they influence local news, then here is your refresher video, which is unbelievable. This is your local news, each in a different city, being independent and independent-minded and caring about their local needs and their local population and not at all being manipulated by a giant national entity.
Hi, I'm Fox San Antonio's Jessica Headley.
And I'm Ryan Wolf.
Our greatest responsibility is to serve our Treasure Valley communities,
the El Paso, Las Cruces communities,
Eastern Iowa communities,
Mid-Michigan communities.
We are extremely proud of the quality, balanced journalism that CBS 4 News produces.
But
we are concerned about the trouble and irresponsible, one-sided news stories plaguing our country.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
The sharing of biased and
false news has become all too common on social media.
More alarming, some media outlets publish these stories simply aren't true without checking facts first. Unfortunately, some members of the media use their platforms to push their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.